Thank you for listening today on Revealing Wholeness, sponsored by Infinity Whole Health. Check out our website at infinityWholeHealth.com, where we are revealing the eternal in each individual, the infinite in the individual. The creativity is made manifest. Limitation is let go. Now, here's your host, Dr. Troy Munson.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Troy Munson on Revealing Wholeness. And, this is an uncomfortable talk for some people, but it shouldn't be, because if we think about it, I have clients that every once in a while they'll come in and they'll be like, something's wrong with my poop. And I'll be like, what are you experiencing? And they'll tell me, and they realize that I'm not going to giggle and I'm not going to laugh, and, we all poop, but, nobody ever wants to talk about it. And yet we think that if our poop is like something's not right about it, that all of a sudden now it's my fault. And we feel embarrassed about that. And that's really not a helpful way to look at it. What our excrement looks like as it comes out becomes a very important thing on how our body is doing. And so we're going to talk about some cases. We're going to talk about what's common, what should it look like, what should our bowel movements do, how often, how frequent, all those kinds of things. And let's just kind of lay it all out there so that you have some ideas. And then it becomes like not this mystery like, well, maybe my poop is telling me something that I don't like. Well, that might be so, but it's fixable. That's kind of the great thing about it, is to be able to say, hey, you sit down, trapdoor opens, the stuff comes out, trapdoor closes, and you're done. That's how we look at like a dog or a cat or a bear in the woods. When they go to the bathroom, they don't have toilet paper. Well, yes, we can say they do lick their bottoms, but oftentimes because their food isn't so good for them. And we'll talk about a little bit about that too. Not that I'm encouraging you to lick your own bottom or anybody else's, by the way. So as we talk about poop, let's first start with just color. Now, I've had clients that we know we're dealing with some liver issues. And eventually they'll come in and they'll say, hey, my poop's like yellow. I'll say, yep, that's bile and other toxins coming out of your liver. And we don't want to see that be the norm by any stretch. And they'll usually tell me within, a few bowel movements, everything's back to normal. But sometimes we have a lot of detoxification that the liver has to go through. And so it's going to push some pretty heavy duty stuff out when we begin that process. Now, per se, I want to back up a little bit and say, if you're thinking about a liver cleanse, I'm not necessarily promoting a liver cleanse. But as we work on a body, the liver will do its own cleansing, where it says, you know what, today's the day that I dump a bunch of toxins. And so we'll see changes in what our poop looks like. And why do I talk about liver? Well, our liver, as you've heard me talk about in other podcasts, its job is to produce bile. And we produce that bile from cholesterol. If you're on cholesterol-lowering drugs, that's oftentimes not a very good thing to be on, because bile is made from cholesterol. Our hormones are made from cholesterol. Our cell markers are made from cholesterol. We stay healthy because of cholesterol. If our blood vessels are cracking and bleeding, and we need to stop that bleeding, we have to plug that crack so that we don't bleed to death with cholesterol. And so cholesterol's been vilified. Please do listen to my cholesterol podcast, and you'll get, a full hour on why cholesterol is so vitally important, and we're really not interested in lowering that number. We're using that number as an indicator for what is going on in the body and beginning to work with those systems so that you can have a normal cholesterol number, because your body is healthy. That's a better way to approach it rather than trying to get a drug to lower, the number, because we just don't like the number. So we'd rather do something very different. So color-wise, we see things like yellow on occasion for poop. We'll see light tan often. A lot of my clients will tell me that. And light tan is now starting to get to the point where they're not processing fats very well, and that's part of digestion and part of liver. And so that's part of bile not being enough in the body. So in my cholesterol talk, I'll talk a little bit about liver, but if we kind of re-mention that bile being produced by the liver is held by the gallbladder. The gallbladder is told by the stomach when it senses oils, hey, you need to squirt some bile into my gut because I need to emulsify or break up these fats from little droplets into tiny molecules so I can absorb them and use that oil to absorb minerals and transport them to the cells and vitamins and all these things that we use oils for in our body. Make hormones, make more bile, make whatever it is that we need to do with that oil. So we start seeing lighter tan poop, we're starting to see we're not processing fats, and that's now the start of liver dysfunction. We'll also see with light tan is that they'll often float, and that confirms that there's too much undigested fat in our fecal material, and we're now challenged because we need those fats. What do we use fats for? The fact that we don't leak water everywhere is that all of our cells have a fatty covering called our cell membrane, and that keeps water inside the cell from leaking out of the cell. And that's really, really important to us to stay hydrated. Our brain has fat coverings all around our nerves that help transmit or conduct that neural impulse that actually makes me be able to talk to you right now and run and play and digest food and move poop through our bowels. We use muscle to push our bowels and get debris out of us that shouldn't be in us. And all that is fat. I mean, that's important stuff. So we want to be able to absorb fat. We want to be able to also have the liver take fat off of our body and burn it. And so if we can't process fat from our food, we oftentimes cannot process it from our body, and now we retain weight. And the liver is so vitally important in maintaining blood sugar, burning fat, helping us stay healthy, so many things. So the next one is more the darker color brown, well-formed. That's what we would expect our poop to look like. And it shouldn't float, should go to the bottom and flush out. We shouldn't actually have a lot of mucus, meaning when we wipe, we don't see a lot of stuff on our toilet paper. 1 or 2 wipes is way plenty. Oftentimes, if I have bowels on my clients that are really, really working well, they'll tell me it's amazing that I wouldn't even have to wipe anymore. Of course, we'll check because we're people and we want to be clean, but ultimately, like we talked about in nature, we'll have animals, the trapdoor opens, poop comes out, trapdoor closes. There's no mess. They don't have a lot of issue. They're eating foods that are designed for their gut. So if we look at like a deer, very tiny pellets because they're eating bark, they're eating leaves, they're eating stems, they're eating, really, really hardcore fibrous roughage. So they're going to have very small, round poop. But there's no mucus with that because they're eating the foods that they should be eating. And so if we, get up from the toilet and it looks like a deer has been in before us and there's all these pellets in the bottom, we're actually not forming that fecal material very well. And so we've got now challenges. So that's more of a constipation issue. And that means we hardly have any bile running through, even though sometimes I'll have clients say, I'm eating so much fiber and so many vegetables. How can my poop do this? I'll say, well, it's really a job of your liver. And it's likely a job that your stomach is not digesting your food very well. And so then the question becomes, do you have acid reflux? Are you taking omeprazole or something like that, or an over-the-counter, acid GERD medication? And they'll oftentimes say yes. And so as we begin to break down food better, as we begin to form that roughage better and detoxify the liver better, our poop should be much more well-formed and not these little pellets. Next is if you have red poop. Obviously, that's a red flag. That's a bad thing. We don't want to see bleeding in our poop. If it's bright red, we know that it's more in the colon. If it's black tarry stools, we now know that we're bleeding in the upper GI or the small intestine. And typically those are going to be medication induced. Not always, but oftentimes. We would hate to think that you'd eaten a piece of glass and you're cutting the insides of your gut. Could it be possible? Yes, but you'd probably know it because you'd have lots and lots of pain. So from that standpoint, you're probably not doing that. It's probably medication orientated, or you're very anemic. You're not having enough iron. We've got other challenges. Your liver isn't able to process the iron well. You're likely lacking a vitamin C issue, which is trying to help blood vessels heal as well as utilize iron and get it into the blood, and so we can carry oxygen. So those are things to think about. My son and I, we eat lots of red beets, and so we like to see red poop because it means that our beets are doing great. So we'll see red poop, but it doesn't freak us out because we know we're not bleeding. And so if you eat a lot of beets, you might see red poop, and that might be a reason. Might not be blood. I've eaten so many beets that I've had red pee, so I thought that was pretty wild too. So be prepared for that. And now I want to kind of go into size and shape. We talked a little bit about pellets already, And we talked about it should be longer, should be firm, shouldn't break apart too much. That's normal poop. Let's talk about the loose poop. So the looser the stool, the more the infection is possibly in there. It can also be that you're eating some type of food allergy that's irritating your bowels. It could be the gut flora as well as not as well or as healthy as it could be. I think I've done some podcasts where we've given healthy people a stool sample, and we've seen 15 to 16 colonies of different bacteria. They have diversification in their gut. But we give them an antibiotic, and now after a month, they still only have one strain of bacteria in their gut. A year later, they'll still only have one strain in their gut. Now, these experiments don't talk about what foods were they eating after they did this antibiotic. I think there's needs to be some studies of people, but I mean, if you have healthy gut flora, would you really want to take an antibiotic and wipe it all out and then try to rebuild it? Because at this point, after 2 years, individuals have only 2 bacterial colonies in their gut. They're still not diversified. And even from that study, we've wondered, does the gut ever recover from an antibiotic? And so I have to believe in my heart of hearts that it would, but it may take some things of doing some pretty interesting things with your gut, like a lot more fermented foods. When I do my talk coming up here in a couple weeks, if this is after the fact, if it's past June, or rather May of 2020, and you're listening to this, I've probably already done my live broadcast of Allergies Part 2, and I'm going to touch on some food allergies. And interestingly enough, there are some blood types that they think may not handle fermented foods as well as others. Now, I don't know that I fully believe that, because I see fermented foods in a lot of different clients with different blood types do very, very well. But let's just say as we do some blood work on people and we feed them fermented foods, could it disrupt some of the blood markers? I suppose that's how they determined your blood types and what foods. They gave these foods, or rather put these foods on blood and see if it agglutinates the blood, meaning coagulates. Do the red blood cells stick together when we give this food in this blood? And so they extrapolated from that, hey, these foods might do the same thing if they're in your diet. Well, I suppose, but if I just put foods on blood and it coagulates the blood, well, that's like direct contact. When we eat food, it has to go through the acid of our stomach and get completely broken down to the basic proteins and then get absorbed in the correct way through our small gut. So, there may be some relative truth to eat right for your blood type, but, maybe not so much. So, I want to see some more documentation on that kind of stuff to see really why and how are they determining all this stuff. So, ultimately, when we're seeing, loose poop, we're saying, okay, you possibly have an infection in your gut, or you have a disruption in the gut flora. And that's where we want to do foods that are higher in vitamin C, higher in vitamin E. That would be your leafy green vegetables, the kale, the Brussels sprouts, romaine lettuce, different types of lettuce, organic spinach, maybe some cabbage if you feel like your body can handle it. Those kinds of things are high in vitamin C, high in vitamin E, and that is very soothing and healing to the gut. If you have complete diarrhea where it's completely runny, almost always it is infection, unless you're on a medication that is known to cause diarrhea. And so for some of you that may be out there that are diabetic, you might be on metformin, and metformin is so easy to cause diarrhea with folks. And I'll have folks, even for just a few days, stop metformin, and they're like, hey, my diarrhea is totally gone. Great, start up again. Totally comes back. I said, you know what, I don't think you have an infection. I think your body's trying to flush that chemical because it doesn't like it at all. It disrupts the gut completely. And so there's some things that we may be eating in our diet that are just literally liquefying our bowels because our body's like, I don't want this in my body at all. I would rather just liquefy my bowel and flush this chemical. And so if that's kind of you need to step back and take a look at what's going on in your diet if that's happening frequently. And then finally, we talked a little bit about floating and sinking, but I want to at least make sure that we talk about it one more time. If your poop sinks, that's correct, should. And then floating is again, that fat intolerance. You're not processing fats well and you're not digesting them. You're not breaking them up and you're not able to absorb fat very well. And that's not a good thing in our body. We need that fat, and it's incredibly important for so many things. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a quick rundown. It's not, exhaustive of poop and what's going on, but we covered a lot of bases and things that you'll likely see. If you have questions, comments, concerns, please email me or respond in Messenger to our Facebook page. I will get it and I will respond to your question as needed. But until next time, it has been a